Welcome to the personality chapter. This module focuses on personality theory. So we're going to hear from different pioneers and different viewpoints. And who doesn't love Lady Gaga? Am I right? She's fantastic. We will be starting our personality project during this module. And in the personality project, I call it the 50 Slips Project, you're going to be disseminating little slips of paper asking people to describe you in one word. And we're going to open the box on a special day in class. And what comes out of that box, you'll be surprised. These are all words that are characteristic of you, that are distinctive to you, that are about the way you relate to the world, or patterns of behavior that you've exhibited throughout your engagement with this individual. So it's very eye-opening, to say the least. The way I teach personality in this module, I'll be teaching it kind of like in themes. So the first theme we're going to be addressing is the psychoanalytic theme. Psychoanalysis is classic Sigmund Freud. And according to Sigmund Freud, a lot of our behavior is completely unconscious. We're not even aware of why we do the things that we do, why we like the things that we like. So, as far as exploring the unconscious, according to Freud, one of his methods was something called free association, where he would allow his patients just to kind of lay down on a couch or recline in a chair, and they would speak about the first thing that comes to their mind. And he would just kind of listen to them and take notes on the patterns of their responses. And that's what free association is. Just free associating just means talking about whatever is on your mind, just letting them ramble on and on. The target method is to retrieve, to review, and to release those painful memories, some of which might be repressed, which means kind of forgotten, not deleted, but hidden away from you where you don't have access to this information. Now this sounds familiar, doesn't it? Because we studied it in the memory chapter. Now this is fun. This is Freud's theory of the personality. He basically divides you into three: your id, your superego, and your ego. Your id is your inner child, your wild inner child, also known as the pleasure principle. It wants what it wants it now, it doesn't think of consequences. So like I said, it's your inner child. It's not evil you, it's just your inner child. But if you look above me, if you Google image id, ego, superego, they always make the id out to be a devil. It's not a devil. And to go to the other side of the spectrum, you have the superego. That's the perfect you. That's kind of like the angel that's seen up, in the Google image up above me. And again, it's not angelic, because the superego can also make you feel really bad and guilty for things that you should have done, right? It's kind of punishing you for how you ought to behave and how you ought to be. So the superego could be very punishing. And then we have the ego in the middle, trying to mediate between the two wants of the id and the wants of the superego. And the ego is called the reality principle because it has to decide right now who should be more dominant, the id or the superego. And it's the ego's job to figure it out. And it's really, really stressful. That's why Freud said at our core, we are conflict, because the ego is mediating against the id and the superego. Very, very conflicting. So here's an example of what the ego has to do on a daily basis. So let's pretend you go to school, but you really don't feel like going to school. So your id is screaming at you, let's skip school, let's just go to Dunkin' Donuts and go home and sleep. That's what your id is saying. And then your superego punishes you, and your superego says, no, it's not right to do that. You should not do that. Skipping school is bad, you're gonna fail, you're gonna be a loser. And that's what your superego does. So then your ego has to kind of bust in and say, okay, maybe we can compromise. Maybe after we go to school, we take our test, we can treat ourselves to a donut, and we go home and nap. That's the ego trying to mediate between the id and superego. Often when you talk about Freudian theory, you see the the famous iceberg, right? And have you ever heard of someone saying it's just the tip of the iceberg, meaning that there's a lot more to the story? Well, there's a lot more to us. What we see, or what people see of us, is just the tip of the iceberg, because we're deep. We go down very, very deep. According to Freud, a lot of our unconscious desires and wishes, it drives us, it motivates us, but it also influences our behavior. And it's under the water where people don't see, people don't fathom it. All they see is the tip of the iceberg. Get it? Iceberg. Okay, talk about controversy. There's probably nothing more controversial than the psychosexual stages by Freud, and I'm not even going to teach this. I am going to share with you a mnemonic device that will help you remember the order of the psychosexual stages, and that's pretty much the extent which you have to know. It's orangutans always play with little gorillas. Think of OAPLG, and that stands for oral, anal stage, phallic stage, latency, and genital stage. And just know that bottom word right down here, that my fingers don't go that way there. The bottom word, fixation, in purple, that happens to you if, and this is, remember, Freudian theory, if you don't go through a stage properly. Whether you get too much satisfaction or not enough can lead to a fixation. Oh, the Freudian defense mechanisms are so fun. You should know what the defense mechanism means, like a description, and also be able to work with examples. And remember, these are all forms of denial. They're all forms of denial. They're all forms of not facing reality, which is why they're unhealthy, but they help us get through hard times. So when you're reading these and learning about them, don't freak out if you've done them before. We've all kind of dabbled a little bit in defense mechanisms, and it's okay so long as you don't make a habit of it and you remember to come back to reality to see things as they are. Terror management theory is a theory of death-related anxiety. It explores people's emotional and behavioral responses to reminders of their impending death. And there's a lot of things that kind of helps us through terror management of death. For example, staying positive, maybe adhering to a religion, defending cultural worldviews, finding meaning in life, striving to achieve your accomplishments, finding fulfillment, and leaving a legacy. So let's move away from original Freud, like old Freud, like psychoanalysis, and let's move into new Freud, which we call people that follow Freud, but they veered away from him in distinct ways. We call them neo-Freudians. The word neo means new. So that's when the word psychoanalysis changes over to the word psychodynamic, and you can also say dynamic theorists, right? And how did they get away from Freud? In two distinct ways. They got away from Freud because they placed more emphasis on the role of the conscious mind, coping with the environment and culture right now today, as opposed to always placing emphasis on the role of when you were a child. The second way they got away from Freud is they doubted that sex and aggression were all-consuming motivations, that it was the root of all evil, that it was basically the root of all your hang-ups and anxieties and depression. That's simply not true. So the dynamic theorist said, we believe in the general premise that much of our life is unconscious, and a lot of those subconscious things, they motivate our behavior, but they also believe in the here and now, and they ask questions like, how's your job, or how's that person you're dating? They don't just ask you questions that Freud would ask that just exclusively limit you to your childhood, like, tell me about your mother, were you breastfed? That kind of stuff. No. Psychology and psychoanalysis and psychodynamic view has changed so much since then. Here's a Neo-Freudian that was very good friends with Freud, a student of Freud, in fact. They exchanged lots of letters with each other. But then you see Carl Jung, that's his name, Carl Jung, got away from Freud in a few of those distinct ways we just talked about. And instead of the id, ego, superego view of the personality, his view of the personality was a little different. He called his the 5 archetypes. And the 5 archetypes are the persona, the shadow, the self, the anima, and the animus. And if you look very closely, it's very reminiscent of the id, ego, superego, but there's some major differences. For example, Freud vehemently disagreed with the anima and the animus view of the personality according to Jung. He didn't think that the anima existed, that men had a female side, and he didn't think that the animus existed for females, that females had a masculine side. And Jung thought, yeah, we all have these different inner persons, like an inner female, inner masculine self, and then an inner female, feminine self. He disagreed. Freud disagreed. Jung also came up with the collective unconscious. Now, if you've ever heard of the Myers-Briggs personality topology test or personality inventory, that's also the work of Carl Jung. These are Jung's 5 archetypes. And when I jumped onto humanmetrics.com, it's like an online personality inventory, and you take the test and it summarizes who you are, and it gives you ideas as to what career you'd be good at. Guess what I got? Wasn't rocket scientist. It was teacher. Jung also gave us these 2 words that we use interchangeably today, like all the time. How many times have you called someone an introvert or an extrovert? When have you used this language? This is Jung's language. Now, here's a myth about introverts versus extroverts. People think that introverts want to hide out, and be hermits all the time in their house, never go out. And extroverts are always party with people. That's not true. I want you to think of this as, where do you get your energy from? How do you plug yourself in? If you were a cell phone, do you plug yourself into people to get energy, or do you plug yourself into quiet to get energy? And if you really reflect, a lot of us have a little bit of both, right? Don't you enjoy your quiet time, but also enjoy your people time? But I guess it's the way you mostly lean. So if you plug yourself into quiet and that's where you really feel energized, chances are you're more of an introvert. And if you plug yourself into people and that's where you get your energy from, and the next time you're with people, you're planning on the next time we're going to be with the same people, that's being an extrovert. So it's really, where do you get your energy from? That determines whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Another Neo-Freudian is Karen Horney, and she came up with a basic anxiety theory. And the basic anxiety theory says that where you get your personality from is how childhood goes for you. If you have a secure bond with your parents, you will likely have a more positive outlook on life. Also, she said that childhood forms our personalities, because in childhood we feel like the world is very hostile and unfamiliar, and the world's a pretty scary place. How you deal with it and how you come out of it will help determine how you kind of view life and you treat other people, which also kind of circles back to what your personality is like. Have you ever heard of the inferiority complex? If you have, that's Alfred Adler. He's another Neo-Freudian that we have to know. And he not only came up with the inferiority complex, but he came up with the birth order theories, right? What they say about the oldest child, the middle child, the youngest child, the only child. Birth order studies, that's Alfred Adler too. He talked a little bit about early memories and dreaming, revealing the inner personality, but his biggest claim to fame is the inferiority complex and birth order. Okay, this is not an exact science, so please don't take this as, law. It's not. Now remember, the birth order studies are theories, and he said that the oldest is the most confident, the middle child has great negotiation skills, the youngest child is probably the most outgoing, and only children have trouble sharing and things like that. Remember that these attributes are just theories. This is not set in stone, and by no means have they been tested in research. So we just reviewed 3 Neo-Freudians, right? We reviewed Karen Horney, Carl Jung, and Alfred Adler. Now I snuck in there Erik Erikson. Remember his stages of crises? He was a Neo-Freudian too. So these are all the Neo-Freudians that came after Freud. We've come a long way since the old days where we believed that the unconscious was this ever-looming, mysterious thing in our brains. Now we're realizing that the unconscious mind is really thought of as information processing without being totally aware that we're doing it. So modern research says that the unconscious also involves like schemas, priming that is unconscious, implicit memories, all kinds of emotions, and even stereotypes and implicit prejudices. You have to know what a projective test is, and while we're assessing the unconscious process, you have to talk about projective tests. Now there's a lot of tests out there that could measure personality. You have objective tests that are not affected by opinions. You have situational tests where the examiner observes a behavior created in a strange situation. And the third one is a projective test. Tests that are expected to project aspects of their personality into responses to maybe ambiguous pictures or patterns or even ink blots. So we'll be talking about some famous projective testing. You have to be careful of the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect is the tendency for people to see themselves as vague stock descriptions, and this is why so many people believe in astrology and horoscopes, and they use it to kind of rationalize behavior. And why does it work? Because we're smart people and we can kind of plug ourselves into these formulas, and we could see that, yeah, okay, I exhibit these patterns, and that's why it's so easy to accept horoscopes and astrology, because we're smart people. We can make ourselves fit any particular mold. So here's a couple of examples of projective testing. We have the construction technique, the choice ordering technique, and the expressive technique. Construction technique is like make up a story, and the story is going to reflect how a person feels. Choice or ordering technique is giving an orderly sequence to prioritizing what's most important here to you, what's least important, and it gives a reflection of how you feel about the world and about your circumstances. Last but not least, on this slide we have the expressive technique. Have you ever seen finger painting or like drawing to express yourself, right? That's free expression. And so like painting a picture or drawing your own portrait, a self-portrait or a family portrait, is an indicator of how you feel about your family and how you maybe even feel about yourself. The house tree person test. We did it in class, and if you want to know more about it, you got to come to class. But if you missed it, I'll tell you about it when you get back. Ask me questions if you're not sure. Another good reason to come to class. In class, we did a word association test, and I asked for volunteers, and somebody volunteered, and then I gave them a word, and they say the first thing that comes to their mind when they hear the word, and then we just talk about it. It's another projective technique. You need to come to class if you missed this. We did a sentence completion test too. I asked for volunteers and somebody completed the sentence. So after we played around with a couple of fun projective techniques, I showed the students in class some projective drawings. And the prompt is to draw your self-portrait. And sometimes the prompt would be draw your family. And you could see, like on the screen next to me, I have several different pictures. And some of these pictures are drawn by well-adjusted kids, and then some no. And a lot of this is a projective technique because the child's drawing is an unconscious response to how they feel about themselves, an unconscious response to how they feel about their family. If they fit in the relationships they have with their family, a lot of these indicators are shown to us in the way they draw and how they draw. The spacing to which they draw people is a great indicator of how they feel about that person. Here's a great example of a projective technique. The child was asked to draw a self-portrait, and the next thing you know, he's drawing this, what you're seeing on the screen. He drew himself with his mouth open, his tongue protruding, and then he drew a really exceptional, like really great rendition of his albuterol inhaler. And then he wrote a little synopsis here about what he has to do when his chest is tight. He has to stop, take a rest, and use his inhaler, sit down or lay down. What's on the mind of this child? Obviously his asthma, right? He's worried about it. And so when the prompt is draw self-portrait and they come up with this, that's an indicator of what's really on their mind. What's their main anxiety? What are they worried about? Their health, his asthma. Another projective technique is the TAT, or the thematic apperception test. The thematic apperception test asks you questions, and they're based on ambiguous pictures, and some are seen right here on the slide next to me. Sometimes a person is asked what led to this picture, what came before the picture, what came after the picture. And as they're describing the picture, you could probably imagine, aren't they describing a projection of what plagues them? If they have worries or anxieties, we're hoping that when they look at these ambiguous pictures, they are going to project their feelings onto the picture. And so the TAT can give us another reflection of what's happening unconsciously. I know you must have seen these before. These are the famous ink blot tests, also known as the Rorschach test. But there's a newer version of the Rorschach test called the Holtzman ink blot test. Now the Rorschach and the Holtzman, they're both ink blots, but they're just different techniques on how to administer them. The Rorschach test is probably the most widely used projective technique. It's a set of 10 cards designed to have people identify feelings when they look at them, and those 10 cards, they could talk about them for unlimited amounts of time. Whereas the Holtzman's a little bit more concise, they're smaller tests, and they're faster. They're 45 ink blots administered with only one response per card, and it's pretty quick. The person just says the first thing on their mind as you're flipping through the cards. The following slides are examples of this projective technique using ink blots. So what do you see? Now we're coming off the psychodynamic, psychoanalytical perspective and the projective testing, and we're moving into humanistic psychology. What would a humanist say about your personality? Well, one famous humanist is Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow did the very famous hierarchy of needs. And the hierarchy of needs is kind of the level of human needs, beginning from the bottom, going to the top, the bottom meeting your basic needs, like eating, like sleeping, all the way to the top to self-transcendence. Again, not just a pretty picture, you have to study this triangle, and it gives you a lot of information right here. According to Abraham Maslow, we all want to be the best that we can be. That's what a humanist would say. A humanist says that we are born genuinely good and that we strive for perfection to be the best us that we can be. But how do we get there? According to Abraham Maslow, it's a ladder, and you can't just jump to the top of the ladder. You have to climb up the ladder, and you have to have your physiological needs met first. Food, satisfying your hunger and your thirst. And then you move up to safety needs. Do you have a place to sleep every single night? Do you feel safe there? Then you go up to belongingness and love. Do you have friends? Can you call someone? Is someone always there for you? And then if that's true, then you're probably going to have good self-esteem. Those are your esteem needs. Do you feel good about yourself? Do you feel like, hey, I get respect from other people. I feel good about me. And then you can become, from here, self-actualized, the best you that you can be. You're living your best life and you're reaching your potential. But he said after this, and this is he added on later in life, he said we can reach self-transcendence. Sense of meaning and purpose comes from not just materials, it comes from helping others, where you put yourself second and you're putting other people around you, like your loved ones, first. Do you want to see if you are self-actualized? Take this quiz. You just have to answer honestly on your own sheet of paper. It's numbered from 1 to 10, and you have 10 questions here. If you strongly disagree, you're going to pick those lower numbers, 1 and 2. 3 is neutral. If you agree or agree strongly, you're going to pick the 4s and 5s. And then you're going to total it up. So after you took the test, did you total your score? And then you have to look at your score, and you can kind of guide by this guidelines here, and it kind of gives you a little information about yourself. So here comes another famous humanist, Carl Rogers. Remember him? Unconditional positive regard. Now, unconditional positive regard is like unconditional love. You love someone no matter what. According to Carl Rogers, he says that's why we have hang-ups and anxiety and depression in life, because the key people in our life, they're not giving us unconditional positive regard. They love us no matter what. You know, sometimes it's all about perception, isn't it? Our parents, they love us. They love us no matter what, but we might not feel like they do because they're maybe giving us a lot of pressure about how we look or how we behave or how we perform in school, when really there's nothing further from the truth. They just want us to be the best that we can be, so sometimes they can be kind of hard on us, but really it's for our own good. It's for our best interest to be the best that we can be. Do they still love us no matter what? Probably so, but do you feel that way? Remember that perception is reality. So it might not feel that way, but it is that way, or at least it might very well be. So it's something to think about before you go on and judge. So here's a great example of unconditional positive regard, the Grinch. The Grinch experienced this acceptance, and even though he tried to stop the Who's Christmas from coming, they still loved him at the end, and they still accepted him, even though he had all those weird idiosyncrasies. So according to Carl Rogers, in order to have a good self-concept, we must receive unconditional positive regard from those key people in our life, total acceptance. If we get too much conditional positive regard, only the approval of some things and not all of our things about ourselves, it hurts us and it brings down our self-esteem, it brings down our self-concept. And incongruence, this is a problem. According to Rogers, incongruence happens when there's discrepancies between the self-concept and actual thoughts and behavior, as well as from feedback from the world. So remember, where do we get our conditions of worth from? Unfortunately, sometimes it's from other people's evaluation of our worth, and it can distort our self-concept. We might go into school feeling really good about ourselves, but then you have this bully or somebody telling you, horrible things about yourself, and it lowers your self-concept and it hurts your self-esteem. So we covered two humanistic theorists, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. And just remember, humanism sounds really nice, that you're born good and perfectly great in every way, and then life hits you hard, and that's why we have hang-ups and anxiety and depression, and that we're always striving to be the best person that we can be. Now, a couple of the critiques of humanism is that the emphasis is too much on the individual, being true to the self. This could lead to a little selfishness and maybe too much self-indulgence. Another critique is that it fails to appreciate the reality of the human capacity for evil, the human's ability to do bad things. And this is kind of addressed with the whole, the Stanford prison experiment addresses this with de-individuation and like dehumanizing of individuals. So that's something that the humanists really don't address. Why people do bad things. If they're inherently good, why are they doing evil things? So that's the critique of humanism. But overall, it's a very, beautiful school of thought to say that we're all born perfect, but then the reason we're not perfect is because of life, and that's not our fault. So the social, cognitive, and trait theory of personality in this part of the module, they talk about traits or characteristics of patterns of behavior or of dispositions to feel and act in certain ways, as assessed by self-reporting inventories and peer reports. Now, factor analysis is a statistical procedure that identifies clusters or factors of test items that tap basic components of that trait. So these are some that we've seen in class, or maybe some that you've investigated on your own by going to humanmetrics.com. And you see personality inventories, they're just questionnaires. The MMPI is the most widely researched and clinically used personality test. It's even used for like job applicants. When they're trying to go for a job, they give you an MMPI to see if you are a right fit for this position. So a lot of these tests are empirically derived tests. Like the MMPI, they're created by selecting from a pool of items those that discriminate between groups. Now, the big 5 factors, also called the 5-factor model, that's what we're going to be discovering with our 50 Slips project. So wait and see. We're going to do that in class. Exercise that we did in class, because remember, we're always striving to get our skills better at applying research and practicing all those things that we learned in the research section. So we're applying it to personality, and this is a good data interpretation exercise. This is what we're going to be doing the day that we open up our boxes, our 50 Slips project. We're going to be putting our slips into these different kind of categories to see if it reveals our big 5 personality traits. You're actually going to receive this blank sheet, and as you open up your slips, you're going to put them in these boxes, and that's how you're going to reveal your big 5. Overall, your personality traits persist over time. So that means that a lot of the personality that you're revealing now as a teenager will persist over time. And it's going to kind of, circle back to your adulthood years. Like when you're an adult, you're likely going to be as funny as you are now, as interesting, as knowledgeable, and all those great traits that you've been described as is going to follow you through to adulthood years. So the social cognitive and trait theories of personality lead us to the behavioral approach. Social cognitive is going to say that the view of behavior is influenced by the interaction between people's traits, including thoughts, and social context like nature and nurture. But the behavioral approach is going to focus on the effects of learning on our personality development. Reciprocal determinism is the interaction of behavior, cognition, and the environment. So what affects you are people around you, but don't forget that you affect them. And it's almost like you're engaging them and they're engaging you. And each of you are influencing each other's behaviors. Do you remember Albert Bandura's Bobo doll experiment? Monkey see, monkey do, that we see violence and we do violence? Well, Albert Bandura talked about reciprocal determinism also influencing behavior. Aren't a little bit of the attributes that you have, could they be the people around you, the people that you live with, the people that you hang out with? Are you funny like your dad? Are you organized like your mom? Are you, I don't know, really rambunctious like your brother? Like, these are attributes of people that you hang out with. You're living with them. So it's not a stretch of the imagination to think that you're going to imitate a lot of those behaviors. It's just very natural to do. In class, I use this example for the behaviorist view of personality. Let's say that there's a cue, like you're in class, and let's use the example of a class clown. Johnny is the class clown. And how does Johnny respond to weird situations in class? He makes people laugh by doing silly things. That's a response that Johnny has that somehow fulfills a need or a drive that he has. Maybe he's very impulsive, maybe he lacks impulse control, and he likes to just kind of lash out, talk out of turn, that kind of thing, and it fulfills a need for Johnny maybe to get attention. And how do the kids respond in class? They're going to do what? They're going to laugh at Johnny. And is that going to increase or decrease Johnny's frequency in that behavior? Well, if they're laughing, do you think laughing is a reinforcer or a punisher for Johnny's behavior? Well, if you thought reinforcement, you're 100% right. When the class laughs at Johnny's silly behavior, it increases Johnny's propensity to do the behavior again, because we all know from the law of effect that behaviors that are rewarded are repeated. And so Johnny's very likely going to repeat those behaviors. That's the behaviorist view of the personality. Johnny is the way he is because he's getting reinforced by his peers, reinforced by his friends when they laugh at his silly antics. I do love organizing information into charts. This is not a decoration. You need to know this chart. Look at the personality theory, the key proposals, and then also look at the assumption, the view of the personality, and the assessment methods. Look at this chart. It is chock full of information. It's like a one-stop shop study guide. Please look at this chart. It's good. As a parent, I wish that self-esteem was like an armor that we can give our kids, and then we could send them out to the world with this great armor of really tough self-esteem, good self-esteem. But the fact of the matter is, where do we get our self-esteem from? Reality, right? It's reality. Our parents could tell us all this great stuff about us. You're the best, you're the smartest, you're the one to watch, you should be in the center and the front of that stage. Like, parents could say all kinds of stuff, but really makes us feel good is reality. When we try out for a team and we make it, when we take a test and we pass it well, like that boosts our self-esteem. But just being told you're great, but then going out and having bad experiences is not going to be that self-esteem boost that we need. Okay, the Dunning-Kruger effect is pretty funny. It's talking about people that have like an overblown self-esteem, and it's pretty funny because it takes competence to recognize competence. So sometimes people can be the most overconfident when they're the most incompetent. Does that make sense? So have you ever met a friend, or do you have a friend that thinks they know everything and they know nothing? Yes, that's the Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah, don't call people that. No. There's a lot of important key terms on this slide. Self-concept is how we view ourselves. Self-esteem is our feeling of self-worth. But self-efficacy is different. Self-efficacy is the belief that we can do something. So if you're trying out for the cheerleading team, that means you have high efficacy because you believe you can make it. You believe you could be a cheerleader. And in fact, when you have high efficacy, it's a sign that you might have high self-esteem too, which is a good thing. Now, the Pygmalion effect is like self-fulfilling prophecy. You fulfill the prophecy just because the label was made, not because it's real. But one of my favorite key terms is halo effect. It's a type of cognitive bias in which our impressions of a person influences how you judge them. And there's a great dating experiment that I'm going to show you in class that looks at the halo effect. It's so interesting. And it teaches us a lot about first impressions. Yes, I'm helping you guys in a lot of ways. First impressions count a lot, and you want to make a good first impression because if you don't, it's really hard to fix. All right, you can Google this YouTube video about the halo effect. It's 10 minutes long, and it's a great experiment on how the halo effect protects people and also the power of first impressions. Have you ever heard of the self-serving bias? It basically says that we are ready to perceive yourself favorably. You will accept the compliment from someone without question. But if someone tries to criticize you or say something negative about you, you're more likely to battle that. You're more likely to contradict that. People accept more responsibility for the goods that they do than for the bad. People are more likely to see themselves as better than average, and we might see ourselves in our in-group as superior, like our religion, our customs, our ethnicity, our culture, as opposed to seeing equity overall. And this could lead to a little something called narcissism, excessive self-love and excessive self-focus. Yikes. You know, make no mistake, culture plays a very strong role in how we perceive ourselves. And you see this in individualist cultures versus collectivist cultures. Individualist cultures is like the United States, right? We tend to value independence, individual achievement. They define like our identity in terms of self-esteem and personal goals. But collectivist cultures, they value group goals, social identity, and commitments. They define and identify themselves in terms of tradition, in terms of cultural norms and harmony with others. Another fabulous chart that's not decoration that helps us look at the individualist culture versus the collectivist culture. We're going to end this module with Julian Rotter. Julian Rotter came up with the locus of control. Where is your locus of control? Are you an internal or an external? Internal locus of control says that you believe that you could change your destiny and you could change your future, whereas externals believe that something else does. People that are external will say things like, well, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. Well, if fate allows it, if it's in the cards, they say things like somebody else is controlling their destiny. destiny. Internals tend to be happier than externals, with the exception of religious people who are externals, but they believe that a religious or supernatural force is in their favor, helping them, not going against them. So that's why there's a little bit of a variation there. But in general, hands down, internals, people who have an internal locus of control, I believe I can change my destiny. I believe I can do the best that I can be, the best that I can be. I'm going to propel my future forward. Those people tend to be a little bit more optimistic, which leads to like more joyful outlook and more, forward thinking, as opposed to externals might feel more hopeless and depressed. So there you have it. Good job, guys.